big star out of me. You'll make a film about a man who's sad and lonely, and all I gotta do is act naturally. Well, I'll bet you I'm gonna be a big star. Might win an Oscar, you can never tell. The movie's gonna make me a big star.
Welcome to Meet Me in the Movies. I am Noel T. Manning II. We've got William H. Buckley, is that right? William H. Buckley?
William F.
William F.
Yes,
Buckley.
yes.
Well, H
He's
was...
dead though, you know, and I kind of feel it.
Yeah, William
I'm
H.
not feeling so
Who was
good
William
myself.
H.? Was that his cousin?
Huxtable? I think it's Huxtable. Yeah, I don't know.
Greg Tillman?
I'm guessing you're just wrong.
I'm just wrong. That's Greg Tillman over there. The only reason I brought up Buckley is because you'll find out in a minute. It's a tease. It's a tease. That's Greg Tillman. I'm Noel T. Manning II. And back, Tim Cam, is it on today? Yeah, there we go. There's Tim Foster. Good to see you, Tim Foster. Thanks for, yeah, you're sleepy. Yeah, I know. It's been a long
We're shooting a little earlier.
We are. It's Thanksgiving week,
Yeah.
and people are excited
well, no,
about.
not by the time they see this.
Well, yeah, that's right. Well,
So did you have a good Thanksgiving, Noel?
I had a great Thanksgiving, man.
Did you eat too much?
I ate some turkey this morning.
Your family got on your nerves last week and all that stuff?
Yeah, that's the problem with Tim, is he just had way too much
he has
turkey.
lots of problems.
See, look, he's still eating turkey. He's got some, what is it? He's got some over there behind him, I think. There's some turkey there. So.
No, that's D-bird.
Oh, that's D-bird. What's a bird? It is a bird. It's a D-bird.
I think he has a bird for you, too. He has a bird for you.
Well, welcome to Meet Me at the Movies. This is a special edition. We're going to do a couple of interviews today. Back in October last month.
It's a very special edition.
A very special, after-school special edition of Meet Me
Yeah, sure, it
at
makes
the Movies.
sense,
It
considering
does.
our subject.
Last month, we got a chance to check out the documentary on Mr. Rogers called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And not only seeing the documentary that was brought to us from the Reel-to-Reel Film Fest and the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival as kind of a joint partnership to bring it. It was a full house almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really nice to see that crowd there. A lot of good Q&A.
Yeah.
I had a couple of filmmakers there as well, and we got a chance to interview them, and so we thought we'd give you a chance to hear some of those interviews.
Yeah.
This documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, is Oscar caliber. It is directed and produced by an Oscar winner, Morgan Neville, who has done tons of documentaries, including one on William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal. The kind of the
Gore Vidal.
Gore Vidal.
Yeah. Is that who you're talking
Gore
about?
Vidal, yeah, Gore
Vidal.
Vidal. Sorry, I was
That's
thinking
all right.
about somebody.
Well,
I was thinking about Vidal Sassoon.
Well, he did.
My hair
Didn't he do
products.
the documentary we talked about last week on Orson Welles?
He did the
and
Orson
Making
Welles
of the Other Side of the
documentary.
Wind?
He did that one.
You met him, right? Did you meet him
Yeah,
last
I
week?
met him
Yeah.
in New York recently.
Yeah.
He also did documentaries on Ray Charles, Keith Richards, Johnny Cash, Pearl Jam, Brian Wilson. Big love for music. His Oscar came for a few years ago. There was a film called 20 Feet from Stardom, and he did that.
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it's about.
But he's he's one of these that loves music, but he also loves telling the story of what happens throughout a person's career, from a political side, from a life side, from a pop culture side. And so it's not just the music on someone or the story on someone's life, but it's more to it than that. And that's what you get for this documentary. Give me your thoughts on Won't You Be My Neighbor after seeing it.
I found it very comforting because it showed that Fred Rogers was the kind of man I always thought and hoped he was.
Yeah.
You know, kind, gentle, caring, loving, supportive, exactly what you saw on the screen.
Yeah.
And I asked Mr. McFeely.
Yes.
I can't think of his real name. But after your interview with him, I said, I always thought he was, Mr. Rogers, that it was sort of the closest thing America had to a saint.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was. He really was.
Yeah.
So, but it was lovely. That's the word I used
Yeah.
to my wife when I got home. It was just a lovely film
Yeah.
about a lovely man.
Yeah, it really was. And I'll give you my take on it a little bit later, but I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and go to the interview. The first interview with Nicholas Ma. Nicholas Ma is the son of Yo-Yo Ma, and he's been involved with Mr. Neville in doing some of these documentaries for quite a while now, and he's done some of his own. And his next film is going to be on Alan Alda, which we got a
That's
chance
what
to
he
talk
told-
to him
yeah,
about
he told
as
me
well.
that, yeah.
So let's go to that interview with Nicholas Ma, one of the producers for Won't You Be My Neighbor. We are on location at the Joy Performance Center in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Special guest with us. We are here for a very special reason. The Full Frame Documentary Festival has brought a film in conjunction with the Reel to Reel Film Festival and also the Cleveland County Arts Council about a guy named Mr. Rogers. And Nicholas Ma is here with us. Nicholas is a producer, and you've been involved in film for quite a while. So let's get a little bit about your background. And you've got some connections to Mr. Rogers back to your childhood days as well.
I guess that's right, yeah. In a way, I've been involved with film since I was 6 years old, and actually was on the show as a kid. And then I was on the show again when I was 16, both times with my father, the cellist Yo-Yo Ma, and those are the only 2 times I've ever performed with my father publicly. So Mr. Rogers had a way of convincing you to conquer your fears in a very big way, certainly in my life. So.
Now, were you a fan of Mr. Rogers as a kid? I mean, when you showed up on that show at 6 years old, did you already know who he was? Did you already follow who he was?
Oh yeah, Mr. Rogers, I mean, that was sort of must-see TV for at that age and at that time. So I couldn't be happier 30 years later to be sort of bringing it back to him.
So what was it that brought you back to this, to bring this story, which is an amazing story, which is one that needs to be told, to screens, and it's getting, you know, in all the festival circuits, people are loving it. I serve on the Broadcast Film Critics' Choice Awards, and we nominated this as one of the best documentaries of the year, so it's a fascinating piece. But what was it that made you want to come back and say, I've got to revisit this guy that I spent some time with, that my dad spent some time with? Talk about that process and that journey.
Sure. I mean, first of all, Morgan Neville, the director of the film, extraordinary director, won the Academy Award for 20 Feet from Stardom. Just someone with such great sensitivity in his storytelling, and the opportunity to work with him, really, you know, how do you say no, right? Yeah. But second of all, I mean, I think there is something that when we were we both loved Mr. Rogers, and as we started to look into it, we realized how many people had a kind of deep connection to this man, and how broad that group of people was. Right? I think today, so often we feel like, well, there's a niche, and there are people who talk to that niche, and to this niche, and that, and you make documentaries where you know the audience because it's the fans of, you know, this singer or this person.
Right.
And when you look at Mr. Rogers, you realize he managed to speak to the country. You know, at his peak, 1 in 8 households was watching Mr. Rogers every night. Yeah. You know, that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. The amount of footage that you had to pull through for this, the archives, just the vast amount of stuff. How did you decide, well, how did the filmmakers, you and the filmmakers decide, okay, this is what we're going to choose, and this is what we're going to make this documentary become?
Sure. I mean, I think there are 2 pieces of that. One, there are some clear set pieces, like his Senate testimony. It's just iconic. And every time it gets, you know, it goes viral on Facebook or wherever, you know, you realize that the power of it. So we knew there were certain things we had to include. But then it was this question of how do you look at not just 900 episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but how do you look at the dozens of other speeches, the hundreds of hours of other footage of someone who was in the public eye since the 60s, right? And so I think we ended up doing a lot of culling sort of more mentally, saying, well, what are the ideas we're trying to put into this film? And figuring out what are those scenes. And we cut those together first, rather than saying, okay, let's cut together every possible scene we could find. And I think that was sort of Morgan's insight, and I think one of the things that he and I had talked about from the very beginning is we wanted this to be a documentary about ideas, right? Because his life doesn't have these huge dramatic arcs to them, right? And so it has to be something that's about ideas, and figuring out how do you create drama from ideas. I mean, that's the joy of filmmaking.
Well, you and I were talking before we went to air here about the impact that he had and how he could relate to kids, and it wasn't just something you turn on TV. It happened. He did that, and he had a way of doing that, and but he also had a way of talking to kids and parents about some difficult topics. So talk about how some of those topics became the theme for what we saw here with ideas.
Sure. I mean, I think he had the courage to tackle, he had the confidence to tackle any subject that a child might encounter, right? That was his guiding sort of principle, right? So kids were experiencing divorce because more and more parents were getting divorced. So he said, I need to spend a week talking about divorce. And he managed to reduce some of the most complicated concepts to not to simplicity on this side of complexity, but to simplicity on this side, where it's baked into those ideas, where he can say sometimes there is a point where your parents don't love each other anymore, but that doesn't mean that they don't love you. And talk about these ideas with such honesty and authenticity that he could communicate things that I think often as parents terrifying to have to think about how you would communicate them. So.
What did Mr. Rogers teach you before the documentary and after?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I mean, I think before the documentary, it was all about pace. It was something that you internalize, right? That you don't need to be afraid of taking time. Because time, I mean, duration is, that's what life is all about, right? That's the one thing we all share in common. Life has a duration, a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know? I think afterwards, there was something he said in his Dartmouth commencement that always stuck with me, which is to remember those people who encouraged you to be true to the best within you, right? And I love the notion that it's not just true to the best that's out there, it's the best that's within you, but it's also about being true to it because it already exists. And I think there's something, I think about that every morning I get up now. I sort of think, gosh, am I bringing the best of who I am to the world? And I think if we all do that, that's a recipe for some wonderful things.
Any final thoughts?
No, I'm just so thrilled to be here. I'm so thrilled to be sharing the film with this community, and I look forward to it.
Awesome. Nicholas Ma, our guest right here on Meet Me at the Movies, on location at the Joy Performance Center right here in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. The documentary is called
Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Won't You Be My Neighbor? Check it out. We'll be right back with more right here from the Joy Performance Theater soon.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make a big star out of me.
Only 2 years until graduation. Then what? The Advanced Manufacturing Academy is a partnership between Cleveland County Schools and Cleveland Community College. It offers you, rising 11th graders, the chance to learn job skills, earn valuable credentials, and complete your high school studies all at the same time. By completing the Advanced Manufacturing Academy, you'll graduate high school ready to start work at way above minimum wage. Check out the Academy and give yourself a head start on a great future.
I'm Dr. Dennis Grogan, orthopedic surgeon. I joined Shriners Hospitals for Children to care for kids who might not get care elsewhere. My greatest satisfaction comes from knowing that I'm making a difference. My colleagues and I help children with the most complex cases, as well as the simplest. Our mission doesn't stop at our hospitals. Our medical research has helped treat children worldwide. When I see kids like Gabby making progress, I'm proud to be a part of Shriners Hospitals for Children.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make a big star out of me.
Welcome back to Meet Me at the Movies. Noel Greg II here. We hope you enjoyed that interview that we had right before the break with Nicholas Ma, one of the producers for Won't You Be My Neighbor. We had a chance to talk to one of the cast members as well, Greg, and the name was David Newell. David Newell plays Mr. McFeely, or played Mr. McFeely for decades.
Most of the run of the show.
Yeah, for decades. And he was a heck of a lot of fun to talk to.
And he was a talker.
He was, on camera, during the Q&A,
Yeah.
and even afterwards we got a chance to spend some time with him. The crowd loved him. He took time autographing anything and everything people would allow him to autograph.
Right.
And he was having a lot of fun with that. So I hope you enjoy this quick little bit of time we have with Mr. McFeely, David Newell, right here on Meet Me at the Movies.
Welcome back to Meet Me at the Movies. I am Noel Greg II, coming to you from the Joy Performance Center in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, with a very special documentary on location. We've got some guests we've been talking to. We talked to Nicholas Ma, one of the producers for the Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary about the life of, who is this about the life of?
Fred Rogers.
Fred Rogers, and we want to thank the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival and the Reel to Reel Film Festival for helping to make this kind of on location thing happen. So a lot of people get a chance to see this, because we were talking just before we went on the air that a lot of times you don't get a chance to see films like this. You get to see the greatest superhero film, but you don't get a chance to see powerful films about life. And your name is David Newell.
That's right.
And you were a cast member for a couple of years.
50 years, but your audience may know me better as Mr. McFeely, the speedy delivery man, speedy delivery. And I thought I had a job for 1 year.
Really? Really?
When I started in 1967, we started taping. It went on the air the following February 19th to be exact, 1968.
So about 40 years you got a chance to work with Fred Rogers.
Yeah, about what?
About 40 years, right? For about 4 decades.
Yes, that's right, I did. And then after his passing, the company continued. And now we have a legacy from Fred, or for Fred, or above Fred, or carrying it on, I should say. It's called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and it's on public television. It's doing quite well. But in the meantime, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is still available to people. It's on Amazon. PBS Kids shows it, so that generations are continuing. In fact, the people who grew up, the first wave of children, are now in their 50s. 50, almost mid-50s.
Well, many people remember you from being really in front of the camera. But you were also behind the camera. You were involved in public relations. You were involved in a lot of things behind the scenes that a lot of people didn't know about. So your involvement was pretty deep.
It was. I was there. I had a full-time job with the neighborhood. The other cast members came in for taping, and I was hired to be in charge of all of the props and costumes, to secure them, make sure they're in place, etc. And during my interview, Fred hired me. After about an hour, we talked, and he said he hired me. And they said, oh, by the way, I also want you to do a character on the program. The name is going to be, he's a delivery man, his name is going to be Mr. McCurdy. Right. That was my name. And you know whose name that was? Fred wrote his own scripts, and he was thanking the president of the Sears Roebuck Foundation.
Big sponsor.
Yes.
A big sponsor for the
well,
show.
In public television, they call it underwriting.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
At any rate, the phone rang the first day of our taping. We hadn't done the program yet. It was Mr. McCurdy saying, we wish you well, love the concept, et cetera, but please don't call the delivery man Mr. McCurdy. It's his name. It looks too self-serving.
Right.
So Fred said, we've got to get you a name. Hung up and came out. And before he finished his sentence, he said, McFeely, that's who you are. Because his middle name is Fred McFeely Rogers.
Right.
A lot of people don't know that, but that's where the name came from.
Well, your connection was so long and so deep, and your friendship lasted for a lifetime. Talk a little bit about the real Fred Rogers. What you see is what you get.
Yes, and that's exactly what his wife would say when they said, what is Fred like at home? Does he throw his sneaker across the room? Or And no, she said, what you see is what you get, and she's basically right. Mr. Rogers on television is adapted for younger children, but when you meet him in real life, that's who he was. It was not an act. He was the real thing. What was the example I was going to use? Just when you asked me that question, I thought of an example. Now I've lost it.
Well, he had a way of connecting with kids, but adults as well, and you saw that from a person who worked with him every day. Talk about those connections that he was able to have with those that he worked with every day.
It was part of who Fred was. You know, he would never forget your birthday. The people who worked for him, we had a staff of about 20. Everybody would get a birthday card or a greeting or some acknowledgement. Weddings, and he'd come to weddings, and when there was a death in your family, Fred would be there. You know, he was truly a kind man. And the neighborhood sort of reflected that too. But example is, there's a saying that Fred loved. There's a Quaker saying, I believe, that attitudes are caught, not taught. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. And that is what Fred did. For instance, in his studies of child development, he would observe a daycare center. And each week, a parent of one of the students would be showing the children what they did for a living. One person was a baker, one was an auto mechanic, etc. One man came in, he was a sculptor. And he came in, didn't say anything, put a big chunk of clay down in front of the kids and started kneading it. And didn't say, this is what you do, that's what you do, nothing. The kids caught his enthusiasm. And if you do something you love in front of children, children will catch it. And I think that's what they did with the neighborhood. I think they couldn't articulate it, but in some way, children could tell that Fred Rogers respected his audience. Yes.
He was authentic.
Yes, he was. And he liked them the way they were, as children. He didn't want them to be grown-ups. He wanted them to meet them progressively. You know, that's but that's, and I think that was the secret of it all, that he loved what he was doing and children caught it.
What do you think the secret of success continuously for a show that did last for so long? How was that success able to last for such a long time?
Well, I think one of the reasons is this documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? That's one, because a lot of it is showing people who may not quite have understood what Fred was doing on television. A lot of it is explained in this documentary. By the way, people can get it on DVD now. And right now, this very moment in Pittsburgh, Tom Hanks is filming a feature, and he's playing Fred Rogers. And Matthew Rhys, he's an actor who's on The Americans. Are you familiar with that? Yes. He's playing in the movie too. And right now they went to New York actually, but Mrs. Rogers and myself and a couple of the cast members, not the staff, we had a cameo in it. Wow. So you'll have to watch for us.
And that'll be out next year, is when you'll be seeing that?
October 2019, yes.
Yeah, it'll.
A year from now.
Absolutely. It's one of those they're going to be pushing for award season. And speaking of award season, this documentary is probably going to be an Oscar contender. I know it's, yeah, absolutely. It's already doing well with the festival circuit, Critics' Choice Awards, nominated this as one of the best documentaries of the year. So it's got a lot of legs. And so people need to see this.
Yes, and I think there's a rating service called Rotten Tomatoes, which is sort of confusing because you think of it as a negative. It's a positive, and it got Won't You Be My Neighbor got 99. Wow. And that's very high, and it's doing very well in theaters. The producer said, "Oh, we'll be happy if we get 10 million." Yeah. And you know, that's a lot of money for documentaries, and they're up. Now they're in the mid-20s now. And also there's a book out now, a biography of Fred Rogers. It's Max King. It just came out, so look for it. And there was a postage stamp too. I don't know if you saw the postage stamp.
Let me ask you one final question. If there's one life lesson that you would want to leave with those watching that you learned from Fred, or that Fred shared with you, what would that be?
I've had that. There's one word that I would say, and that's listen. If you listen to children and anybody, you'll learn a lot. And you know, get off your computer, put your paper down, and just give that child undivided attention. That's what Fred did. And even as an adult, when you go into his office to ask him a question about a production or something, he'd be busy writing away. He would literally put things down and look at you. Wow. And you know, that shows respect. Yeah. Even not only to children but for adults. Right. And that is very important. And I think that's another one of the successes of his career in television. Yeah. But he also loved music, and he loved creating. He loved the creating of the show more than he loved the performing. Wow. He never really wanted to be a TV star, and that was the one thing that was a negative to him. He didn't like getting up there and say, "Look at me." I mean, he wasn't that. He felt that way too, and that's not the way people perceived him. But he felt that way. But what he really liked are the puppet days where he wasn't on camera, and he liked the composing of the music, and it all fit together and made Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood immortal.
Absolutely.
Well, you're winding up, but I want to do one more thing before we wind up together. You have to do your sign off. Where you're gonna tell them what you want to do.
Well, active listening, that is the key message here. Active listening. Yes. Noel T. Manning II here with David Newell, who was your name again on the show
is Mr. McFeely, Speedy Delivery, and I'm still delivering. I'm here. I've been going around in a lot of these screenings, and I enjoy meeting the people who grew up with the program.
So there you go. We appreciate you spending time with us, learning more about this incredible documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, from the Joy Performance Center in Kings Mountain.
And you at home and you right here, look at the camera. I'm going to count to 3, and we'll all say Speedy Delivery. Here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Speedy Delivery.
Welcome back to Meet Me at the Movies. Hope you enjoyed these interviews we had today for this after-school special edition of Meet Me at the Movies.
Even though it airs in the morning and late at night. Okay.
Well,
depends on your
but
kid's schedule.
homeschool,
I didn't think of that. Okay.
online,
We're-
you know, whenever and wherever and however you do the school thing, this is all for you. So I hope you guys enjoyed these interviews we had with
Good
David
recovery.
Newell, Nicholas Ma, and go to the color bars. We're going to the color bars. Magenta.
I think he's trying to give us a
trying to
hint.
tell us something, You know, I really did, as I've revisited the documentary, I think it was just a stellar film on a lot of different levels. Won't You Be My Neighbor is the name of it. But it tells the history of the U.S. during this time period, and it shows how Mr. Rogers didn't just push that stuff aside. He knew that families were talking about the things. He knew that kids were interested in it, and kids didn't know what certain words meant. I mean, the one that really got me was talking about assassination and the
with
Robert Kennedy
Kennedy,
assassination.
yeah.
And, you know, you see that being talked about on a kid's show, and it's like, wow, I mean, that's just courageous is the word that I think comes to me more strongly than anything else about this particular documentary, courageous.
He talked about chronic illness.
Yep.
He talked in children at
Yes.
that. He talked about divorce.
Yeah.
All these serious topics that impact kids.
Yeah,
but
war.
Yet, the average adult doesn't know how to
Absolutely.
talk to them or deal
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, so
And it's a special place in children's television. I mean, you don't see that sort of stuff, that kind of content on Barney or Teletubbies.
No, you really don't. You really don't. And Nicholas Ma, who was in Paris recently with his dad for the, not the celebration, but the recognition of the end of World War I, we were emailing back and forth, and one of the things he sent me in an email is this screened in Paris. And he got to do a Q&A there as well. And he said the audiences there really embraced it. And I wish I'd brought the email, but the email in essence said that the audiences said, these are the things that we hope and pray for when we think about America, and we hope that these kinds of things still exist.
Didn't you get the feeling at the screening at the Joy a couple weeks ago that the general consensus among people there were, gee, we wish he were here now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that there was this real
need him
sense,
now.
real sense that we need somebody like Mr. Rogers now in our current state of affairs. Absolutely. Well, hope you've enjoyed this week's show. We've had a lot of fun revisiting this documentary and had a great time doing the interviews as well. And hope you guys got something out of that as well. And just look for this movie during Oscar time. If this does not get nominated for an Oscar, I will be shocked.
Yeah. And I know it didn't come here theatrically, but you can get it on Amazon Prime.
Yep.
And, yeah.
It is available
online.
now, so check it out. We highly recommend it. Even if you don't typically watch documentaries, this is a film that has a complete story arc. It has all that you would want in a good film.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Something like 99% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah,
Very
it's
high.
amazing.
Yeah,
Certified fresh.
It really is.
Certified fresh.
Very
Solid
nice.
A for me, bordering
Oh, yeah.
A plus.
Yeah, A+.
Yeah. All right, Tim, we appreciate you as always. D-Bird, hope you are continuing to enjoy your turkey, and thanks for all that you guys
Remember,
do.
Thanksgiving was last week.
That's right, but leftovers.
Oh, okay.
It's all about the
okay.
leftovers,
All right,
man.
gotcha.
Talking about the leftovers. Till next time.
You think he has leftovers?
Man, next week we've got a ton of movies to talk about.
Okay.
And I've got the huge list of things I've seen. Some that are still in theaters: Widows, the girl caught in the spider's web with a monkey hanging off her back, the Fantastic Beast and How You Want to Smell Them, and just a whole bunch of other
I don't want to
films.
see that
A
one.
whole bunch of other films, including Creed and the Gary Hart biopic
Yep.
called Frontrunner with Hugh Jackman. So there's a lot to talk about next week. And so until then, I'm Noel T. Man II. That's Greg Tillman. That's a wrap.